Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I get to ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is a friend of the show and my first ever two-time guest. He's a PhD sleep specialist and sleep coach. He has studied circadian rhythms and sleep for over 30 years. He's the founder of Neos Performance, a sleep resource offering online training and sleep coaching for people seeking to optimize their lives through better sleep quality. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Dr. Glenn Landry. Dr. Glenn, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me again.
I know we have a lot of stuff to talk about, but we do have to start with our Wheel of Stupid Questions, which is just a constant reminder that asking questions is good. Even if they're stupid, if you point them at the right people, you can get some pretty smart answers. So with that, we'll roll into that segment.
Spin that Wheel of Stupid Questions!
Okay, let's see what we get today. Can't remember what you got last time. Oh, here we go. Dr. Landry, do you believe in ghosts?
Do I believe in ghosts? No, I don't think I do.
Nothing at all. You don't think that there's any creak in the corner that might be something beyond just, natural?
I mean, I'm open to the possibility. Absolutely. There's lots of things that I don't know. But I'm going to stick with my answer that ghosts, not so much. Yeah.
That's probably the most scientific way to approach it, right?
Yeah,
if you can't prove it, if you can't measure it, then it's probably not real.
Yeah.
That might be the way.
Open to the possibility, but it's that trust but verify. It's
for sure.
But I'm definitely a science guy. So.
Okay, so with that, for people that didn't listen to the last podcast, obviously I encourage people to listen to the first one first. But for people that don't, can you just give me a quick 10,000-foot view of your background and why you got into studying sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said in that previous session, I came to the field honestly because I couldn't sleep. As a teen, the hours from 11 o'clock until 4 in the morning were my favorite time of day, even though it wasn't day. And, I went through the process of learning that my brain was ready to process information, to study, to write papers, to do everything. Everything was easy for me at night, whereas in the morning and the early afternoon, everything was so much harder. And that began this process of thinking, okay, well, I'm just designed to be a night dweller, an extreme night owl, if you will. And then I went through, over the last 30 years, a series of life-changing moments. Life-changing moment number one was taking a course from Dr. Ralph Misselberger, a world-renowned expert in circadian rhythms and sleep. So circadian rhythms, again, daily biological rhythms. We have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. We have to keep them separate because they're incompatible processes, and he taught me how to do that, and it changed my life. I went from being a good but not great student to being able to compete and win national scholarships that funded my honors, my master's, my PhD, and a postdoctoral fellowship. And so that was life-changing moment number one. Life-changing moment number two that happened along the way was learning that I was born with this nasty set of genes. The brain's like an engine. It produces exhaust. These genes I have produce way more exhaust than the average individual. But sleep literally washes away that exhaust. And so by being an elite sleeper, I'm able to overcome these nasty genes and negate the impact of those genes. And from there, I just wanted to share that information and learn how do we impact sleep health worldwide. Life-changing moment number three was, realizing after 20 years in academia, producing and publishing research, realizing that we already know enough to make a difference in people's lives. The issue is that we have this knowledge gap, this translation gap, being able to translate the science into meaningful application for individuals, translating it and getting it for the individual's lived experience. We're all different. how the science applies to us, therefore, is unique to us as individuals. And there really wasn't a means to do that. The internet is full of information, but it tends to be one size fits all approaches. And so that led to me realizing that, my calling was to be a sleep coach, as you mentioned. And, one of the first, really, I don't know of anybody else that's doing exactly what I do from a circadian rhythms and sleep health perspective, working with individuals to help them improve their sleep health. And the next thing to really mention is, I have two objectives. One is to change the way the world prioritizes sleep because we're simply not getting enough of it. And two, to give people the tools and the knowledge to actually access the sleep they need. Think of it as performance enhancing sleep, what I call elite sleep. So that's the 10,000 foot view, what brings me to the field.
Yeah, beautiful. So as we kind of geared up to do this, we had a little bit of discussion about what we wanted to cover today. And, the last time we talked, we kind of covered things from an overarching view. And this time we want to really dive in a little bit deeper into not just like prioritizing a quantity of time of sleep, but also understanding that there's a quality of sleep that can be achieved by understanding the cycle. And so let's start from that as someone that, I'll confess, I don't know much about it. So let's start right there. What are the cycles of sleep and why are they individually important?
Yeah, Jake, you nailed it. So often we talk about sleep in terms of hours slept. And, some people will say, man, I slept a really long time and I still feel awful. I don't feel good. And other times people will say, well, man, I only slept for 4 hours, but boy, I feel so much more refreshed. I feel better and ready to go on 4 hours of sleep. How we feel when we wake up has a lot to do, in fact, more to do with the stage of sleep that we woke up out of. If we wake up out of slow wave sleep, deep sleep, our brain, the brain activity is consolidated. The brain waves are these long, slow waves. And that is a stage of sleep when our brain is growing, repairing, restoring tissues throughout the brain and body. It's in a deep stage of sleep. So when we wake up out of that, we experience something called sleep inertia and we feel really groggy. And so if you're feeling like, you can't get started, you need your morning cup of coffee and it takes a long time for you to get going, it could be that you're waking up out of slow wave sleep. Another stage of sleep is REM sleep. We're going to be talking about all of these stages, but REM sleep is really important because it consolidates learning and memory. Think of it as complex learning, consolidating that learning and memory. And it also builds our resilience to stressors and trauma. So we'll talk more about that in later sections. But the key thing about REM sleep is that our brain is super active. In fact, if you're not a trained professional, when you're looking at the polysomnography, the waking brain and a REM sleep brain look very similar. The brain is super active. So when we wake up out of that stage of sleep, we feel alert and ready to go. In fact, we have this sense that even if we wanted to, we couldn't get back to sleep. And so these stages make a big difference in our sleep health. And so to go back to the beginning here for a moment, our sleep architecture matters. One of the key things that I want to communicate today is that it's not just hours slept, but it's about getting healthy sleep architecture, the stages. And we have wearable technology. I would say that Oura Ring and Fitbit are absolutely best in class for this, but we have other devices like Apple and Whoop, and they can give us some insight. The sleep architecture, the key to understand sleep health is knowing that our brain and body must be ready for sleep at the time we schedule it. There's a lot of preparation that has to happen to get us into the right state so that we get the sleep architecture that we need. So I always talk in terms of coaching. I always talk about the importance of building a healthy sleep window, protecting that sleep window with what we do during the day, as well as at night when we can't sleep. And all of this is designed to build a routine, predictable sleep window. And I realize that shift workers out there are going to be saying, well, how the hell do I do that?
Yeah.
Well, the truth is that it is possible, and we can get into that a little bit later. But of course, we have programs that are designed specifically for shift workers. We talked about this before, Surviving Shift Work. And it provides all of the information people need to know about circadian rhythms and sleep within a shift work paradigm so that they can do this. But getting back to what I was saying, our brain must be ready for sleep at the time we schedule it. And if it is, then falling asleep will be very simple. It won't take long for us to fall asleep. And even more importantly, once we have fallen asleep, we'll get into that stage of sleep, that deep sleep I talked about earlier, that is slow wave sleep. And we'll begin that process and we'll have a bout of slow wave sleep. And then we'll transition into our first bout of REM, about 90 to 100 minutes into that sleep. And from that point on, we will cycle from non-REM sleep into REM sleep and then back into non-REM every 90 minutes. And if we have a healthy sleep window, remember, we talked about this before, and I will, review this concept. We need 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night, adults 30 plus. And the notion that as we get older, we need less sleep, we now know that's false. Adults 30 plus need 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night. And in order to get that 7 hours, you need roughly an hour more in bed, a sleep window that's an hour longer, because we're not sleeping through the whole sleep window. There's these programmed awakenings. The notion that we have that, I need to hit the pillow and sleep solidly and not be awake at all, that's false as well. Awakenings are programmed into the sleep architecture as part of this transition from non-REM to REM and back to non-REM. And so a sleep window of, let's say, 8 hours to get 7 hours actual is the minimum standard. That's what we're shooting for. And if we do that, we'll get somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 REM cycles. Okay. And that's that 90-minute cycle that we've been talking about. In the beginning, if we break the sleep window into 2 halves, there's really this emphasis on slow wave sleep in the front half. Okay. And that's really important because that slow wave sleep, remember earlier, I said that sleep washes the brain. It's that slow wave sleep that literally soaks the brain and central nervous system fluid, and it washes the brain. But in addition to that, its growth hormone is peaking, and we're getting growth, repair, restoration of tissues throughout the brain and body. And slow wave sleep is also critical for building immune response and immune function. So we are inundated with pathogens on a daily basis, and it is our immune system that will identify and destroy these pathogens. In fact, if we are getting the slow wave sleep that we need, and we've built our immune system over, let's say, 7 to 10 days before we get a vaccine, if our immune system, by being an elite sleeper, our immune system is primed, then it responds to the vaccine much more effectively. And so this is part of the reason why there is so much variability in whether a vaccine works or it doesn't work for an individual. Part of that is how well they slept in advance of the vaccine. All right. So again, immune function, growing, repairing, restoring tissues throughout the brain and body. That's slow wave sleep. And that's really the front half.
Are there ways to, so if we recognize that there's different portions of our sleep cycle that occur, and they're going to occur on a certain, time frame, are there ways or I don't know what it would be, supplements or maybe actions a person can take to make these various stages last for certain periods of time?
Jake, it's such an important question. And now the answer to this question will apply to any supplement or any sleep aid or anything that you're trying to use to actually, because I've just explained to you that deep sleep or slow wave sleep is so important. Well, here's the mistake that we make, and I'm going to give you, some background on this. Do you remember I said that I have, if you will, there's many, but I have one of the core Alzheimer's genes. Okay. And what it means is that my brain produces much more exhaust. And so I need more slow wave sleep to wash away that excess exhaust. When it was discovered, this link between slow wave sleep and amyloid, when that was discovered, pharmaceutical companies rushed to produce a drug that would promote slow wave sleep. So the thinking there, well-intentioned, is that if we get more slow wave sleep, then we're going to wash away this excess exhaust, the amyloid. And to be clear, that's just one of the exhausts. But that was the notion. And they were successful. They managed to produce slow wave sleep-inducing drugs. The issue is that when we promote one stage of sleep, slow wave sleep, it's at the expense of other stages like light and REM. And what happens then is that we become REM deprived. And I just explained to you a little bit earlier that REM is really important for consolidation of learning and memory. So the problem that we have when we try to hack the system and promote one stage of sleep, because we know it's healthy for us, we do so at the expense of other sleep stages. So my advice to everyone listening is stop trying to hack the system. We have physiological processes. I call it the sleep accountant. We have physiological sleep processes that determine our previous sleep-wake history and what our sleep need is in terms of the different stages or the sleep architecture. So going back to what I said earlier, what's critical, instead of trying to take a supplement or promote one stage of sleep, because we know that that's healthy, or we've seen on our Apple Watch that, oh man, I'm not getting a lot of REM, or I'm not getting a lot of deep, and I've heard this is really good for REM and this is really good for deep. Instead of hacking the system, build a sleep window, protect that sleep window with what you do during the day and at night when you can't sleep, and let your sleep accountant balance the books naturally. So getting back to that first half, that's what slow wave sleep is doing. Now in the back half, once we've washed our brain and we've done all of the wonderful restorative things that sleep can do, you've only done half the work at that point. The second half of sleep is light sleep alternating with REM. And let me explain this. Light sleep isn't necessarily poor sleep. Okay. It's in fact a very important stage of sleep because it processes our day and it identifies what was really important. Think of the things that happened that were salient, really important things that must be remembered. Okay. And it identifies the learning that is critical to future success, if you will. And so it is important for consolidating learning and memory for something called muscle memory. Think of it as all of the skill acquisition that your audience, the ability to play a musical instrument, the ability to throw a baseball and spin it the way you want to get the movement, all of this muscle memory that, you don't have to be an athlete or a musician to require this. Anything that requires you to act without thought. Think of it as that processing, being able to be situationally aware and then act without thinking. All of that is muscle memory. It's that routine behavior that is the SOPs. If this, then that. And without processing it at a deep level that takes time. It's instincts. So that's light sleep. And it's alternating with REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is also, as I mentioned, critical for consolidation of learning and memory. But that tends to be, rather than the skill acquisition, That REM sleep is actually processing and consolidating learning and memory for knowledge acquisition. Think of it as complex knowledge acquisition. Anything that requires deep thought and really processing and really being able to dive deeper into a subject matter so that you can identify and understand critical concepts. All of that, REM sleep. Another important thing that REM sleep is doing is it's allowing the brain to be much more creative in its problem solving. And so for your audience, what I would encourage them to think of is a time when they were dealing with a problem. And that problem, they would perseverate on it, and they just kept working the problem, but they couldn't come up with a solution. And then, almost as if by magic, they sleep, they wake up one morning, and they realize, oh, here's the solution. Why didn't I think of that sooner? It's so simple, and yet I couldn't reach it. That's REM sleep. And the reason it's doing that, if you think about it, REM sleep is the dream state of sleep. And when we're dreaming, anything is possible. When we're awake and we are bound by all of the rules, regulations, and boundaries of waking life. But when we're dreaming, anything is possible. And so we can get outside the box and we can make connections between things that we wouldn't have thought of. And that allows us to be much more creative thinkers, and we can solve a problem much easier through REM sleep. And so that allows us that ability to get outside the box, as I mentioned, and solve a problem in a very creative way. That's critical.
So when we think about, I have a couple questions thinking about that dream state. How does, if at all, the content of a dream affect the sleep state?
Yeah, it's an interesting, so certainly not my lane. So dream theory and dream analysis, not my lane. But what I can tell you, getting back to that creative part, is that we are processing not just problem solving, but we're processing the stressors and the traumatic events in those dreams. So anything that has been weighing upon us can creep into our dreams. And it's really part of that processing. One of the things, it's a really important question that you raised, Jake, because one of the things I want your audience to understand is that we are facing traumatic events, even if we don't tag it or think of it as being traumatic. So something can happen that triggers us, but we're just moving and solving problems. But that triggering event leaves an emotional tag. And when we're in REM sleep, what's happening is the brain is processing the day, thinking about those things, and that emotional tag is actually a traumatic learning event, if you will. So it's given great importance. It's been flagged as this was really important. Either it was, man, this was awesome, I wish we could do this all the time. Or it's this was awful. We must avoid this. Don't do this again. That kind of really critical tag is processed during REM sleep. And so what happens is the individual then, during their dreaming, will have thoughts, a dream that's associated with that in some way. And sometimes those connections can be very loose. Again, there are no boundaries in dream state of sleep. And so the brain is just making these connections and essentially, simplifying here, it's removing the negative emotional tag from that event, but consolidating the learning from that event so that when we are triggered during our waking lives in the future, and it's like this, it can be even without thought, the process is, holy shit, this is happening again. This is just like what happened here. Watch out. Know this. But instead of being triggered and going into that sympathetic nervous system overdrive, we're able to process that and say, okay, all good. This is what we do. And it's instinctive. It's happening automatically. So it removes the negative emotional tag that would trigger a sympathetic nervous system response. And it allows us to act appropriately. and have better situational awareness. Does that help?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because it sounds very similar. I've done a form of therapy before with my therapist called EMDR, and it sounds extremely similar to that. Consolidating those memories back into a different way where you can kind of deal with them in a different way based off of where they're stored in your brain.
Exactly. So EMDR, eye movement desensitization, resensitization. This is a game changer for people that are dealing with post-traumatic stress injury. The issue, and I've worked with individuals, the issue is, an individual will come to me, they're dealing with the PTSI, and they're saying, I'll give you one example. This individual learned about us, reached out, and the issue for them was every time they got into REM sleep, they would have recurring nightmares that would be frightful and kick them out of, and they'd wake up in sweats and they'd really struggle. And at that point, sympathetic nervous system is peaking and they've got their adrenaline response. There's no way they're getting back to sleep. The issue for that individual or people that are going through this is that they don't have a safe place for sleep because sleep's actually where the demons lie. And so, as you mentioned, EMDR is a means by which an individual is able to process those traumatic events in a safe environment with a professional clinician that's then able to make those connections and help process that trauma so that then later they can sleep without the triggering of those nightmares. So then they can get the benefit of the sleep. So what I always try to explain to people is that, the sleep coaching that we do, this is very simply team-based care. You're working with your healthcare professional. They've got their toolkit and we have ours. Working together, we can get people through a process so that they can create a safe place for sleep and they can get the benefits of healthy sleep architecture. So really important to understand the importance of EMDR combined with, circadian rhythms and sleep health training.
Yeah. In terms of that, when you talk about someone having, nightmares and stuff, say someone doesn't wake up from a nightmare, how does that affect the sleep architecture as it goes? Does it have an effect or is it kind of processed just like a dream?
I think it's difficult to say for all individuals because we're all unique. Mm-hmm. However, what I would say is if you're able to make it through the dream, and so think of it this way. What I would liken it to is a computer that's doing a virus scan at night. So, and it's doing the virus scan at night because the computer's not being used. So it goes through, and imagine the situation where the virus scan fails and it gets locked in a spot and it doesn't get to complete. So then it gets stuck in a loop. So each night it's processing, trying to run the virus scan, but getting stuck in the same place. And so it's just this perpetual loop. So to answer your question, if the individual has got recurring nightmare, so they're sleeping through, but it's just recurring and recurring and recurring, that is likely a situation where the individual hasn't been able to remove the negative emotional tag through that REM sleep. And so they are still processing. EMDR could be helpful in that case, where to help them get through that stuck point so that they can finish processing. That's what I think could be the case. Yeah.
Another question, as you talk through the idea of light sleep and heavy sleep, or deeper sleep. I know people in my life that will describe themselves as a light sleeper or a heavy sleeper or whatever. How does that, tag of the fact that, I'll wake up with anything that happens in the house versus I can sleep through a construction site. How does that overlay inside of this sleep architecture?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So let's process those two separately. Let's talk about the first one, which is an individual that is in this perpetual light stage of sleep. And I'll give you an example. This is a real life example for me. You know that I'm a sleep geek and, a science guy. And so I certainly will look at my sleep architecture. I'm not a slave to the sleep architecture, but I'll look at it. It's part of that trust but verify. And an interesting thing happened. One morning, I woke up and I looked at my sleep architecture, and my sense was that I had slept well. But when I looked at the sleep architecture, I got very little deep and very little REM. And I spent most of the night in these quick transitions from a bit of deep, but then immediately back into light, or a bit of REM and then immediately back into light. I didn't have a sense of that when I woke up, but when I looked at the architecture, I realized that that was the case. So I was in this perpetual, think of it as light sleep. And now to give you what was really happening there is that was a sleep during a windstorm. So there was a windstorm, and my brain was actually processing the windstorm as part of my sleep and was saying, hey, this is not a safe place to sleep. Now, to give you the background on that, 4 years previous to that night, I was actually doing a session just like I am right now in the middle of the day, but it was a windstorm. My wife was at work, my kids were at school, and a tree, I live on the edge of a nature reserve, and we have old growth trees, and one of them fell through our house. And it actually fell through really close to me. It went through our bedroom. Now, interesting point about that is that I was not traumatized, or at least I didn't think I was traumatized by that event, because I knew, it was shocking. It shook the whole house. It was a very big event. And I immediately went outside and took photos and like full disclosure, hopefully nobody's listening. I was excited about it because I knew we needed a new roof, and this tree, we had insurance. I was getting a new roof. So, part of me was like, hey, this is a good thing. All's well. My wife is fine. I'm fine. The kids are fine. No harm, no foul. We're going to get a new roof. All's well. So I didn't actually see this as being traumatic. But years later, I'm sleeping during a windstorm, and my brain is automatically processing and saying, hey, man, this is a dangerous place. The last time we had a storm like this, a tree fell right through this bedroom. And so that's the kind of thing that can happen. And so if you are a person that is perpetually in light sleep, you think of it as hypervigilance. That's the way I would describe it. Your brain is processing information, and so it's a stressed brain that is aware. Parents of infants know this, right? They hear everything that's happening in the house because it might be time to wake up and change a diaper or feed the baby, all of those kinds of things. And it takes time to train that out of our system so that we can actually get back to really good sleep architecture. So stressed individuals are going to have hypervigilance, and that can have an impact. It can have an impact on their sleep architecture. So that's the first. But you also mentioned, what about people that can sleep through anything, like a construction zone? What I would say is that's a simpler issue. They are likely heavily, chronically sleep deprived. And so, and I face this a lot where people will say, Glenn, appreciate you, but I don't have a sleep problem because I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, doesn't matter what I'm doing. Well, by definition, they do have a sleep problem because you shouldn't be able to sleep anywhere, anytime, no matter what's happening. What that means is that they are chronically sleep deprived.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that is definitely my on the polar opposite ends of the spectrum. Me and my wife. My wife is waking up for everything, and I don't know the world exists. And it's been like that since I was a kid, as long as I can remember. My dad does construction, and so I grew up just in loud, noisy environments. It was always sleeping through everything, and now I love it because I never wake up. But it probably is a symptom of a problem.
A bit of chronic sleep debt is likely happening there. But you touch on something that's really important. And this gets to, something that we discussed in the last podcast, but I think it's worth, repeating, is that the way we currently sleep worldwide, what we would call an average person's sleep, the average person is getting less than 7 hours of actual sleep each night. In fact, they're closer to probably 6.5. So there's this, and that might not seem like much, right? 30-minute debt. But a 30-minute debt night after night after night after night accumulates. In fact, 3 successive short duration sleeps of, 30 to 60 minutes short is the equivalent to pulling one all-nighter. If you think back to, college or university days when you were young and in your 20s and you were pulling all-nighters, that's what's happening there. And so what we're doing, the way we currently live our lives, is we are borrowing from the health and well-being of our retirement years. People that say, I don't have time for sleep, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, the sad truth is they're going to get the sleep much, much sooner than they expected. And, those final 10, 15 years aren't going to be all sunshine and rainbows for those people. So the way the world is currently sleeping, we're not getting enough. And the sleep architecture isn't as healthy as it should be, I would say. So that's the first thing. And this is why I said, mission number one for us is to change the way the world prioritizes sleep. The next thing to talk about is the fact that we were born with the ability to get the sleep we need. You mentioned it. When even from a young age, you were able to sleep through anything, you said. Well, that was, you were born with that ability and it was hardwired. Now we have trained that ability out of people's lives. The way we currently live our lives goes far from what we evolved as. And because of that, it's having an impact on our ability to naturally get the sleep we need. So what are we doing as individuals? You mentioned it earlier. We're taking a sleep aid. We're taking, supplements and things to try to drive or hack the system and drive the sleep architecture. And what that does is it results in us getting a stage of sleep that's, prioritized, but we are depriving ourselves of the other sleep stages, and all of them are important. The proper sleep, wash our brains in the front half, and then use that well-washed brain in the second half to consolidate learning and memory, process trauma, all of the process trauma and all of the things that we talked about.
I think you touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about the cycles of sleep and the duration of time, but sometimes people will describe it as like, oh, I think I slept too much or something to that effect, where they wake up and they feel groggy, which you would say that's less about a duration of time and more about the time inside the cycle they woke up. Is that right?
Yeah, you nailed it, Jake. So let's touch on that, because those people that say, I don't have time for sleep, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, within that group, there's also individuals that would say, man, I function best on 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep. And I used to be that person. Like as a teenager and in my 20s, I firmly believed, remember I said I was an extreme night owl. I wouldn't be getting to sleep until about 4, and I would sleep from about 4 until 8. And that I'd wake up, and at that point I felt like I was good to go. I was restored. So here's what's happening for individuals. And I'm giving a general here, and I realize that, we have to look at an individual sleep architecture. But generally speaking, for those individuals that think they function best on 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and if they get more, they wake up and they feel like crap. Well, what's actually going on there? I want you to think of this as the sympathetic nervous system versus the parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response. When we go beyond our design limits, so when we're staying up longer than 16 hours and we're getting less than 8-hour sleep windows, when we do that, what we're doing is we're engaging this sympathetic nervous system. It triggers and it says, okay, it's designed to provide us with brief periods of superhuman performance. But what we are doing right now with how we currently live our lives is we are chronically engaging that sympathetic nervous system. And so what happens is that you go night after night after night after night on short duration sleep, and you are living on adrenaline, if you will, to use simplistic terms. You've engaged that sympathetic nervous system, and it's able to do this for a long period of time. But it's like an engine. When you redline an engine, you can redline it for a brief period of time and you're probably going to get away with it. But if you sustain those high RPMs and you're redlining that engine over and over for sustained periods of time, eventually you are going to break the system because it's not designed for that. And that's essentially what's happening. So for the individual that is used to getting 4 to 5 hours, they're living on the adrenaline. And then what happens is when they give themselves the opportunity, which is rare, they give themselves the opportunity to sleep longer, the system kicks out of sympathetic and gets into parasympathetic. Think of that as healing, repairing, restoring, and that's that deep maintenance. Here's another way to look at it. You've got your engines that, they can go out, and you've got routine maintenance on those engines for firefighting. Mm-hmm. Well, then it's got to go in for that deep, long, heavy overhaul maintenance. Well, that's essentially what's happening is you're waking up out of a heavy maintenance overhaul and your brain is just not ready to go. And so it isn't that you don't need sleep and that you function best on 4 to 5. It's that when you gave yourself the chance to restore, repair, it was in a deep restorative maintenance. And that actually is why you didn't feel as refreshed. You were doing something you needed at that point.
Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about this, as you described the fact that we kind of live on this like 16-hour cycle, right? We should be awake for 16 hours and then sleeping for the balance. Where does like energy by way of action or a caloric deficit, things like that, like where does that fall into? I just know that like some days, you have a large energy output, you're doing this thing, whatever it is, working in the garden, and then you come inside and it's way before you would typically be tired, and now you're super tired. Where does that fall into our need for sleep in terms of our energy systems?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So you're really talking about, like, when we're talking about sleep drivers, there's two mechanisms. One's a homeostatic mechanism. Think of it as the longer you've been awake, the greater your need for sleep. The other is a circadian mechanism. We talked about this. That's a time of day dependent mechanism. And so the issue that we have is part of what's going wrong for our sleep health is that we have become all homeostatic and we've really turned our nights into days and our days into nights, and we've flattened out the circadian rhythm. Now, the reason that matters, and the way this gets to the answer to your question, is that a lot of times people think, okay, I am not sleeping well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my ass off today and I'm going to grind and I'm going to really use my brain and body. And then I'm going to be able to get this long sleep. Now, the problem with that, as we discussed previously, we're designed for a 16-hour waking day, an 8-hour sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep. And one of the key things is, remember I talked about how sleep washes the brain. Well, that's that growth, repair, restoration cycle. But an important thing to note is that component it dissipates quite quickly. Just getting 3-4 hours of that sleep dissipates that homeostatic need. So it is actually the second half that is circadian stamped. It is a time of day dependent mechanism that kicks in and creates this, what I call a sleep maintenance zone. And so when people are finding it hard to stay awake up until bedtime, so let's talk about the 3-4 hours before their normal bedtime, and they did a lot during the day and then they're just dragging their butt through that 3-4 hours. That's actually circadian dysregulation. There's supposed to be a wake maintenance zone that extends the waking day for those hours up until bedtime, and then homeostasis and circadian regulation allows us to get the front part of sleep, getting the deep sleep we need. And then that back half kicks in a sleep maintenance zone. So when we are, trying to, use and you mentioned a really important thing. No 2 days are the same. Some days might be physically strenuous. Other days might have involved a lot of psychological stressors. Some days might involve a ton of new learning. Every day is different. And so the sleep architecture that we need is different based on the kind of day we had and what our prior sleep-wake history has been. Again, this is why I keep saying it's so important for us not to try to hack the system, to let our sleep accountant actually balance the books. Build a sleep window, protect that sleep window with what you do during the day and at night when you can't sleep, so that your sleep accountant can predict the sleep window, prepare for it, and then balance the books.
And when everything's functioning as it should, and you're giving yourself a prioritized sleep window, it should solve itself. That's the way to think of it.
Yeah. What I would say is, if you are routine and you're giving yourself this sleep window, and your brain and body is able to prepare for it and anticipate it, then you will be able to get that sleep. But again, it is something that you have to work at. And again, for shift workers, they have to, they're putting an increasing challenge on themselves. So there's some learning and work that needs to be done. Again, surviving shift work is designed for those individuals, so they understand how to anchor their circadian rhythms in a shift work paradigm, and so that they can promote strong sleep health in that. But yes, what you're saying is absolutely correct. Instead of trying to take aids or supplements to try to hack the system and promote a particular stage of sleep, and it's not about, I want to be able to drug myself into a sleep so that I can get some sleep because I'm desperate to get sleep. It's about doing the work so that the sleep that you get is healthy sleep architecture. If we get back to our roots and promote that, we will be able to get the sleep. I mean, we've seen it with our clients. It is possible to get that sleep out.
Awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end of the time. I don't want to keep you all day. I appreciate your time. Knowing the other things that I want to cover with you, we're going to have to do a round 3 at least at some point here. But thank you again for coming on, lending your expertise, helping me understand this a little bit better. I'm starting to get it over time, I think. And so can you let the people know where they can see you, where they can get a hold of you, where they can get access to some of these programs that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can email me, first name Glenn with 2 N's. So email me at glenn@neosperformance.com. And if they go to neosperformance.com, the website, they can get all the information that they need as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll link all that stuff in the description of the video and the audio, so you can get it. And once again, thanks, Glenn, for joining me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. We'll have you back again soon.
Such a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.